King Dazar absolutely deadly with a peak of 7 lives claimed at one point.
Yeah, and I mean, what I'm the most surprised about on this statistic here is the average completion time, 3 minutes 16. And of course, this is for 19 dungeons, right, from the cups. So yeah, this boss just takes a really long time. And I think part of the reason why it takes them so long is because most of the teams are playing 4 obelisks on top of that last boss, which is just incredibly dangerous. And of course, it also takes a long time to finish off all of these awakened mobs. So yeah, I will see if both of those teams decide to play 4 obelisks again on that higher keystone level and the Tyrannical Affix.
Yeah, most definitely. And, while we've seen a lot of lives and big wipes going on in Dazar, most of the time, though, the wipe percentage, the average number of wipes that we really end up seeing, Zyro, is very low. A lot of very successful clears of this boss. Doesn't seem like it's going to be as painful as some of the other end bosses that we're going to be seeing later on in the tournament.
That 0.06 average wipes comes out to about 1 in every 16 runs ends up wiping on King Dazar here. So he's not that dangerous. I'd really like to see what the first boss difficulty is, because we know that Spit Gold, especially on Tyrannical, can start chunking people. So let's see how these teams are prepared for Tyrannical King's Rest.
That's right, round 2 coming up between Wunderbar and Goosey Bad. Let's get into it.
All right, so this is the last chance for Goosey Bad to continue this series. They need to win this game since it is a best of 3. Goosey Bad now also switching to that triple hunter setup, which we've seen in King's Rest a lot, just because it's such a single target heavy dungeon, and hunters are just known to be incredibly good for that specific dungeon. We see an interesting skip attempt coming up by Wunderbar here, as Celia is getting feared. Since they are playing Alliance here, they don't have this the Blood Elf racial to get rid of those, and they don't have any other dispel like a Master Spell or anything like that, so they have to deal with these minions differently.
Yeah, and it looks like they're just going to be running through and shadow melding off these constructs here. Goosey Bad did not deal with those shadow ads like we saw Wunderbar deal with. So that's going to be a little bit of efficiency saved up for Wunderbar later on when they want to start chaining in those Guardians to the next few pulls. Goosey Bad's going to have to figure out a clean way of dealing with them later on, so we'll keep an eye on that difference here. Of course, the difference in dungeon progression right now is that Goosey Bad gets to start pulling these trash mobs earlier. And already we're seeing another difference from what we saw in the 19s earlier on from Goosey Bad, but can't speak too soon as Wunderbar has decided to say, you know what, we're still going for it on 21. We're pretty much pulling the entire room and committing our bloodlust to it and AoEing it down with those hunters. You can see now is topping the damage meters on that Prot Warrior here.
Wow, all right, so they pulled the whole trash in the first room together. Now did start kiting, because now they're all raging at the same time. This is incredibly dangerous, because any of those deathly chills going through now will be very difficult for now to survive. I think they timed the spell reflect perfectly here. They were having now leap away once they were out of interrupts, and then when they were enraging and now had to spell reflect back up, he was going back in and then spell reflected those deathly chills on the Witch Doctor. So very well done by them, as they're up to 20% trash now, while Goosey Bad decided to handle this a little bit slower and do it in 2 pulls instead of 1.
And that's really opened up the dungeon already for Wunderbar here. They're already pulling the boss, while Goosey Bad is just now engaging the final trash pack in the room. So any time behind that Wunderbar was that has just been completely caught up right now. They're already on the boss. They're already cleaving down these 2 Guardians on top of it. Now, another advantage that triple hunter comp brings to this boss is that you can aspect of the turtle those initial spit gold debuffs, so you don't actually have to worry about cleaving down any of those gold ads that spawn during the fight here, and that's just so much nicer. You can spend all of your free time cleaving the boss now. Now, if they do get any spit golds that go through, they can just hunter trap them to not have to worry about dealing them for another minute. So this is just a great comp for dealing with this boss and only making sure you have to focus on the boss.
Yeah, they actually got a little bit lucky here on Wunderbar's side, as they got all spit golds on all different hunters. So they got the perfect value out of immuning all 3 spit golds at the start, meaning Celia could do a lot of damage here as well in melee range without having to heal the hunters. Now, of course, they're out of aspect of the turtles, and therefore Celia does need to heal the spit gold. But it looks like it's not a big deal at all, as he's continuing to do damage up to 40k DPS coming out of that Mistweaver Monk, while Goosey Bad, on the other hand, now is also fighting the Golden Serpent and also those 2 constructs that they've pulled on top.
It wouldn't surprise me to see the freezing traps come out here, but honestly, with how quickly this boss is going down, they could probably just DPS him down before the blobs can even get there with maybe like a ring of peace or something. That should be all they actually need. But there you go, freezing traps coming out now. They won't have to deal with any of those animated golds. And yeah, they could just single target the boss now. Just perfect execution. Although, like you mentioned, a little lucky with how they got one spit gold on each hunter initially, so they actually don't have to DPS the golds at all. Kind of nice for Wunderbar here.
Yeah, definitely. We do see Goosey did save their Bloodlust for the Golden Serpent, so they used it on the pull with the constructs as well. While of course Wunderbar did commit their Bloodlust for that initial trash pull that they did. They are now downing the boss. Goosey not even that far behind, considering that they used 2 pulls for the trash compared to the 1 pull on Wunderbar's side. It is a Tyrannical fight, so it is definitely close to a minute. I would say that the difference still is in favor of Wunderbar, but there's still a chance for them to get back, as Wunderbar is now fighting the Gauntlet here.
Important to mention that since it has been a while since we've had a King's Rest or any dungeon in the MDI, really, of course, on our tournament realm, the King's Rest order of these this Gauntlet is fixed, starts in the back left and then goes counterclockwise, so they'll be dealing with the trio next, then of course King and Queen, and then finally the Raptor pet add as well. And we'll just see them slowly work through that. Of course, while they're dealing with that first trash pack, well, actually, yeah, there we go. The Guardians are just now coming in here. They were tagged by Zalia a little bit earlier. So they'll be cleaving down these 2 Guardians with that next trio and just being efficient with the trash gun once again. This King's Rest strat has really just kind of become perfected over the past few cups.
Yeah, and one thing, to be honest, that I haven't really noticed that much yet was explosive. Because on that big pull that we saw on Wunderbar, there weren't actually that many that went off. So it looks like the Hunters are actually doing a really good job dealing with those.
Oh yeah, I mean, just the power of the Hunter right there, just super clean cleave. Now, it looks like one of those Guardians is a little bit higher, but they're going to be able to deal with it before the next pack spawns anyways, so just really great execution coming out. Honestly, from both teams here, Goosey is putting together a pretty respectable run too. They just didn't quite go for that first room pull that we saw from Wunderbar.
Yeah, and I mean, it is incredibly risky as well. Now we see the minions of Soul actually reaching Goosey. So those minions that Wunderbar dealt with at the very start, they had to deal with now. Meaning they lost a little bit of extra time having to deal with those, but didn't look like a big problem for them, as they're now moving on to that second Gauntlet with the trio, as you mentioned. And one more thing that you gotta worry about here is raging, but with this triple hunter comp, having a clean suit to get rid of that raging is just so good. Of course, they need to make sure they're assigning it properly, because Soothe is being used and put on cooldown if you use it in a mob, even if you don't dispel on the Enrage. It's not like a normal dispel. If you use a normal dispel, a friendly player dispel, and that person doesn't actually get cleansed from a debuff, then your dispel does not go on cooldown. But if you use an offensive Soothe, and you do not dispel an Enrage, in fact, it still goes on a 10-second cooldown for Hunter and Druids, and therefore they want to make sure they assign it properly so that you don't end up having a mob that is still raging.
Yeah, that could be a real pain if you don't have everything perfectly planned out, but I would hope that with 2 weeks of practice that all of our teams would have that perfectly planned out at this point. Would be a little weird if they weren't. Now, of course, once again, we're seeing Wunderbar skipping the second obelisk as well, so both of the first 2 obelisks have been skipped on their side. Do you think that they could potentially be going for a 4 obelisk with the final boss here?
I do think that's what they're planning to do for sure. We've seen it on a 19, and it already felt really difficult then. But with the increased gems and increased damage that they're doing, I think it's definitely doable. It is risky for sure, but I think they can pull it off. And we saw them skip the construct here on the bridge. I think it was Zalia, which, to be honest, is a bit risky to have your healer pull it to the side. But this is just a small little damage gain again, because the Hunters could walk through immediately and immediately start doing damage on this pack that now pulled together. While if it was a Hunter that was doing the skip for them, then he would arrive a little bit later and therefore they would lose more damage. So slight little gains here, damage gains, by having the healer pull it apart, and they also now engage Machimba on top of having all of these constructs here.
And that was a slick skip. They essentially skipped a trash pack, but only using the healer's shadow mode. So they have their shadow mode later on if they wanted to, dodge any casts or skip more trash. So that was just clean from there. And like you mentioned, the warrior's a dwarf. He couldn't have shadow mode skipped. He probably would have had to commit a death there. So not having to commit that, just a little bit of extra clean execution from them there. great to see from them. Just even small skips like that are perfected make her route look so much better. And we're seeing a difference here from Goosey Bat here. Pulling Samurek back under Chaos, the Fear guy, of course. Maybe they didn't find a way to deal with skipping the Purification Construct, or they're not as comfortable pulling 4 Awakened mobs on top of the final boss. Not really sure. I'm assuming we'll see later on if Wunderbar does go for the 4 Awakened mob pull. But just slight differences in strategy here, and if Wunderbar is able to pull this off, they're just going to have a faster run in general.
Yeah, for sure. One difference in comms I've just been seeing as well is that all of the hunters on Wunderbar are actually running Night Elves, while Goosey Bat is all running Dwarves, which we've seen Dwarves a lot in this dungeon just because of the fact that not only can you get rid of the bleed effects, so the Severing Axe, and also the bleeds from the Berserkers later on, but you can also get rid of the Samurek Fear debuff. So if you decide to pull Samurek on top of the last boss, you can get rid of those. But it looks like Wunderbar is using the Night Elves. I'm not really sure why. It could be because they want Feign Death and Shadow Melt, or they have some other strategy in mind where they need the Night Elf.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Didn't the hunters all tend to play Dwarf before as well in here, just purely for that third boss? I would assume that that's what you would want to do, especially on Tyrannical. So we're gonna have to see whether or not they have that completely planned out. Right now, of course, there is a mechanic with that third boss where you can see where the boss is facing before the bleed debuff goes out and like pre-turtle it. But that's incredibly finicky and requires you to be spread out so you can see where the boss is facing. But it's definitely possible, especially for a team like Wunderbar.
Yeah, it might be possible that they just turtle the debuff off. We'll see as they are now moving on to the next trash pack. While Goosey Bat is now engaging Machimba. They did the Machimba room pretty cleanly on their side as well. So they're not that far behind when it comes to execution in this room, but overall they're one whole boss behind. So just they lost a little bit of time everywhere a little bit. I don't think there's one specific thing they did much slower compared to Wunderbar outside of that first boss room pull. It just looks like they did everything just slightly slower, and of course they also played Samurek, the obelisk, which cost them a little bit of time as well compared to Wunderbar just skipping all of the obelisks so far.
Yep, and once this first trash pack is dealt with, we'll very likely see the general skip that we saw perfected at the end of the previous season, where everyone except for one person will be straight running through all this trash with the speed pot as well as their camouflager and viz pot, and going to the final boss. One person looks like it's going to be actually looks like it's 3 people doing it.
It's 2 people.
This might be like
a
a
safety thing.
It's a safety thing. Like if one of the hunters go down, they can have 2 people here. One of these hunters will pull the boss, and then everyone else will get pulled out of that realm into the boss room. So this is just a safety thing for sure with the 2 hunters. Yep,
yeah, I think I like that because if one hunter goes down, Xalia could just rest that hunter from inside the realm, and then you still have the other hunter. I guess it would work either way. Not really sure, because if you rest someone inside the Nyalotha realm, they always spawn outside. So in theory, even if something would go wrong, they could rest the one person. Not really sure why they chose to do the double hunter, but we can ask them later to see why they made this decision. And now we see them fight Kula, so let's see how they deal with that Severing Axe. Let's see. It looks like Gingy turtled, so I assume he already skipped one of those debuffs.
Yeah, for sure. That was a perfect... and actually, you can see this. The hunters are spread out completely across the room in a triangle so that... And then also you have Now and Xalia stacking on top of each other, away from every one of them, so that when the boss turns to throw the Severing Axe, the hunters can see, oh, it's facing me, I need to pre-turtle this. It's really important that you pre-turtle it. It deflects the debuff. If you turtle afterwards, you only get the damage reduction, the bleed debuff stays on you. So yeah, perfect execution from them there. That was awesome to see. Now, the thing about the 2 hunters here as well is that it's not really that much of a loss, right? You lose your potion cooldown for the first boss, but one of the sort of gimmicks of this council fight is that if you drop cooldown, if you drop combat, so you feign death in between each boss, you're actually not in boss combat. So your potion cooldown resets, your potion timer resets, and you can repot for each boss. So they don't really lose much by doing the 2 hunter thing either.
Yeah, this is just very well done, and those small little things that they're doing here, this is really what matters, right? You have, even if it doesn't save you a lot of time, but even if it's just a couple of seconds, it really matters in the MDI setting. And if you have those 2 weeks to practice, we really want to see those kind of things. So cool to see by Wunderbar that they're doing this skip differently, and also the fact that they did this like triple spread out with the severing axe, as you mentioned. It just looked really cool how coordinated they played it. As they're now about to finish off Sanazel, one thing about Sanazel, actually, it is quite a bit annoying to have explosive on this boss, because when the totems spawn, they can also spawn explosive. Because in the past, we've seen teams just ignore the totems except the explosive totem. But they can't really do it this time around, because otherwise you'll just have explosives spawn on the totems, and then it's really hard to deal with it. So that's why they just finished them all off.
Yep, super clean from them here, and if they choose to with this Akali the Conqueror here, they can actually just feign death pretty much every single one of these barrel throughs, but not going to do that, just going to eat the damage. That's a Tyrannical 21 charge that only did about 20 to 30% of their HP, so very clean from them there. Not much to worry about. Of course, you can feign death, make them recast it, but they just don't need to, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they want to feign death it. Maybe they decided, oh, there we go, Fragments is feign deathing just as I said they're not doing it. Maybe it's just, maybe they just roll a dice and see what happens. As
they're
one
just
more
trolling
charge.
us.
Yeah, they probably are. As they're about to finish up Akali, so it is Tyrannical, so the mini boss will probably not be a big problem for them. We've seen this dungeon on 45, and it caused some issues for tanks to be able to tank Shadow Soul, which does a lot of magic damage to the tank. But on Tyrannical, it really shouldn't be a big deal. And after Shadow Soul, they doesn't look like they need a lot of percentage, because they also have the 4 obelisks still that will give them extra percentage as well.
Yep, Wunderbar now gearing up for this incredibly dangerous pull here, the 5-pack on top of the 2 Berserkers. This is a lot of potential damage coming out here. Those Severing Blade debuffs from the Berserkers here can do a lot of damage, especially if they all stack on now here, so gotta keep on eye on that red debuff on his player frame in the top center of the screen. If that red debuff goes up to 1 or 2, it could be dangerous, but looks like they've got it figured out. Of course, you can soak that with Hunter Pets. Just, you lose a pet, but you can always just resummon it. Now, everything in that Raging Affix just gets Ring of Peace back. No big deal for Wunderbar, making everything look just so easy.
Yeah, that actually looked really easy, and everything died so incredibly fast. And yeah, as you mentioned, just dealt with those debuffs with the bleed effect so incredibly well. Even with Nao not even starting to kite, he was just standing in that corner. You saw the Ring of Peace come out to help separate the mobs a little bit, and I assume they just used those Hunter taunts to get the debuffs on them. And yeah, it was incredibly well done. As they're now engaging Shadow Soul, they just want to make sure they're dispelling or soothing off the enrage effect, because mini bosses are enraging as well, which can cause some issues now and then. But with the triple hunter, it really shouldn't be a big deal, as they're all as they are stacking up in melee range, except the 3 hunters.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and I could be wrong here. My memory sometimes escapes me, but did we see them do 4 awakened mobs in the regular season? I know they did it definitely in time trials. But I'm not sure if we saw all 4 awakened mobs with the final boss, especially on Tyrannical in our original 3 cups. Maybe our analyst or host could back us up on that afterwards. But this is going to be incredibly dangerous here when we get to the final boss, right? Tyrannical, 21 King Dazar, with all 4 awakened mobs at the exact same time. It's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, this is going to be really hard. And as we mentioned before, they're not running dwarves. That means if they get the multiple fears from Samrak, it's going to be hard for them to get rid of those, right? Because they don't have the dwarf racial. They do have Turtle to get rid of one of the fears, and they also have the revival from Celia, which has now been used for the first set of debuffs. We also see those Hunter Pets, the Core Hounds, taunting the Spirit Breaker to make sure the debuff is not going on now, because not only does it do a lot of initial damage, but it also increases damage taken by all other sources, and therefore they want to make sure it doesn't go on now. And now we see them just making sure they're positioning the pulls on the floor in the perfect order as well, to make sure they're not getting feared into those.
We saw Void Over Mouth here going down first. Of course, they are going to be running out of interrupts quickly with a triple ranged interrupt comp, and they're not running the Skitra Bow again to reduce the cooldown of their abilities. So that's a 24-second interrupt. So, of course, Void Over Mouth are going down first. Looks like Beckoner of Chaos is going to be going down second for them, removing those fear circles so that they don't have to worry about that extra damage going out in the group. And then once those down, they'll go through the Blood of the Corruptor just to make sure that they have more room in the room to kite. Of course, with Urgroth left, they can just pet taunt the rest of those tank buster abilities should they choose to. And perfect execution again from Wunderbar here. They just have everything down pat.
Yeah, and this is so incredibly difficult just because there's so many different things you need to manage, right? If you're one of the hunters, you need to make sure you taunt or Gruff on the Spirit Breaker before it starts casting. If you taunt it mid-cast, it's too late because it snapshots the target, right? So you want to make sure you taunt it in the right moment. You want to make sure you dodge Riban's Hunting Leap, which probably close to one-shots you, his frontal here, on Tyrannical. And then on top of that, you also want to make sure you position properly to make sure the pools spawn in the correct order. You want to dodge those tornadoes, you want to interrupt Void Weaver, and not only that, with Void Weaver, they have the longer cooldowns on interrupt because they're the hunters, right? They don't have the melee interrupt timer. So some of the casts need to be let through, and they need to make sure they time it perfectly. Some of them probably went through on Now when he had the Spell Reflect ready to be able to interrupt all of the other casts. So just incredibly well done, well executed by Wunderbar.
And with Tizala down, that's pretty much all she wrote. Engine should be completely done for Wunderbar with the boss sub 40%. They're entering the final phase. The only real dangerous thing left is going to be those blade combos on the tank. But come on, you've got Now one of the best warriors in the world tanking this boss. He's definitely not going to be going down.
I think he should be totally fine. It looks like they are missing 4% enemy forces, but I think this is just an observer bug because sometimes Shadow of Sul doesn't get added to the percentage in the observer feed. So they definitely should have 100%. It's just a mistake with the percentage here. So once King Desire goes down, they are done with the dungeon.
Yep, like you said, Shadow of Sul worth that 4% that's missing here. Wunderbar, 2 0-death dungeons in this initial series, showing everyone right away that they're here to play, that perplexed boss in Cup 3 was a fluke, and people are going to have to bring their absolute best game to have any chance of competing.
Without question, Wunderbar taking that swift 2-0, and great call there, Nagura. That extra 4% of trash was just the Shadow of Zul. Bit of an section on our side, but Wunderbar takes that swift victory, and this is about what we were expecting.